your father came to England when he was 3 months old, right?
Yes.
In 1900.
Correct.
So when you were growing up, did you know any grandparents?
I did not. I knew one grandparent from my mother's side. Her name was Frimet Feingold, but the parents had passed away before their husbands had passed away, and one had gone to Eretz Yisrael, so I never met them. So there was no grandparent influence, patriarch influence there.
And where did your father come from when he was 3 months old?
He was born in a place called Vaslui in Romania. And his father was mentioned in his birth certificate in Romanian, which was translated into English, as a fence merchant. His mother was in turn a follower of the Bahusha Rebbe, Russian destiny. And she wanted to come to England because she could not find suitable shidduchim for her children. And she asked him for blessing. He gave the blessing, but on condition that she continues with her Gemilas Chasodim fund, and she did. So that was the source of it comes. And also my father was always daven Nusach Hari, because his father daven Nusach Hari. And why did he daven Nusach Hari? A bit of research. There was a Chossid, a couple, Talmud of the Tzemach Tzedek, who was wandering in those areas, and he had quite a strong influence on a lot of ordinary people. So there was a strong Hasidic influence, but it was never expressed or articulated. In fact, when my grandfather went to Eretz Yisrael, he said, Baruch Hashem, I can now daven Nusach Hari as I did before. So there was a...
You said a Chassid of Tzemach Tzedek wandering which area?
In the Romanian
Romania.
area. Romania, it was, but in North Romania, there's those areas, I think, which today is of course different countries and all the rest of it, but there was some influence there. But there was only a smattering, but that smattering was sufficient to keep him spiritually alive and rather independent in his own commitment to Yiddishkeit. So that was very, very crucial holding on. And he gave us an education which he had, and therefore we were living in two worlds, in the secular world, very much in the secular world, but also in the Jewish world by force, so to speak, by persuasion and duty, etc., and all those motives. But the family was pretty unique. It wasn't the only one, but it was small, very small number in comparison with the Jews in Manchester. He was very Zionistic, and his father took him to hear a speech from Chaim Weizmann, who famously said to the speech of 600 people, most of them with beards, and he said in Yiddish, "Kim mit uns, come with us, mir wollen bauen Medina, we'll build a country. Oh, the Yiddishkeit wird ihr noch kicken, the Yiddishkeit you looked after, and we'll look after the rest." So that was the big seducing force which took a lot of Jews to Eretz Yisrael, on Aliyah, etc. But these were the winds that were blowing at that time.
So for a Lubavitcher Bacher today, or for a Lubavitcher younger man today, who grows up on the lap of Lubavitcher parents, in nurses, in his mother's milk, shlichus, and his kashrus, and Lubavitch, and all of this beautiful values. What role would you say, your dad played in your hiskashrus? Because you sprouted from him, and yet you went to Lubavitch, but your father wasn't a Lubavitcher. So what kind of a yid was your father? What was it about him that drove you to Lubavitch? Wasn't
Well, he facilitated my move to Lubavitch, because when I told him, being engaged to yeshiva, I've decided to go to Lubavitch, so he nodded. In fact, when he came to see me off in Southampton, the ship which I journeyed to America, it was SS United States, he said goodbye to me with a tear in his eyes, and he said, "Please come back." Well, in those days, a trip to America was the end of the story for most immigrants into the United States. So he had that loyalty to Yiddishkeit. He had that feeling for Yiddishkeit, but he could not teach me about Lubavitch because he was not involved at all. And it was only later in Manchester Yeshiva, and ironically in Gateshead Yeshiva, where I developed this full addiction, and it was also some story which I'll talk about later.
so? Your father was a Zionist in England at a time of great Zionism, or at a time when Zionism was not very hot in that neighborhood?
No, in that, among Jews, it was very hot. And in Manchester, particularly, the Balfour Declaration, he was 17 years old when the Balfour Declaration was signed. He had Chaim Weizmann, who was working in a president, the first president of the Israel. He was in Manchester doing some research in Manchester University. And there were a lot of leading Zionists, the founders of Marks and Spencer, that shop. They were leading Zionists, but they were secular Zionists. So there was always this. In fact, my grandfather was the chairman of the the treasurer of the Mizrahi movement in Manchester. So they were being pulled in two ways. And it was only later when he joined the Machziki Hadass, which was a Galicia-based shtiwul. People came from Belzer Hasidim, and they formed more of a right-wing Austritz-Gemeinde in Manchester. And this was the struggle between the two sections of Jews, as it was in Frankfurt.
So how did it happen that you didn't become an ardent Zionist if you were the son and the grandson of noble Zionists, Frume Yidden? Why didn't it tug at your heartstrings?
Well, my first cousins, also by the name of Vogel, they became very ardent Zionists. They came in very involved in the Mizrahi movement, and they went on Aliyah. They did. And other ones, an uncle of mine went to Israel, and he became a Zionist. He was an accountant. He was the chief accountant to the Palestinian electrical company. So he had a prominent position. They were in that way. But at that moment, I was exposed to a more right-wing Aguda experience. And it was through these conversations with my friends in the Aguda where they wanting to intensify my attachment to Agudas Yisrael, I found flaws in the Me'etzes Gedolei HaTorah, so we went very deeply into it. And slowly but surely, I moved away from those feelings and became an ardent Agudist.
So you're talking about, at this time, you're having these conversations, debating the heat of the moment, which is Zionism, which is so attractive, which is such a beautiful idea, and you're fighting it, and you're arguing, you're finding flaws, and how old are you, 14, 15?
No, this I was 17, 18, 19 now.
17, 18, 19, and finding flaws with Me'etzes HaTorah.
Well, my rationale, which may be not true, but my rationale was, my friends were saying to me, look, this is the perfect social vehicle for spreading Yiddishkeit. Horaya, the biggest proof is that they have this Godel and this Godel, the Chofetz Chaim and the Gerer Rebbe, and it's universally. And I then, exploring my own internal feelings about understanding Hasidus, I couldn't put together how mystically, rationally, you could have from Lithuania joining someone from Polish Hasidus as one front. There has to be an individual who embraces both, an individual who is full of Torah himself, and at the same time, a social activist, which I discovered, I felt that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was probably that type of person. It was a very, very special identity of a person which didn't need the organizational framework, because the organizational framework flowed from the principles and the philosophy.
So, a Bach is 17 years old. I'm sorry that I'm dwelling on this, but a Bach is 17 years old, and these are his issues: Hasidus, or Lubavitch, or Aguda, or Zionism. I mean, this must have been a good quality group of friends if this was the topic of discussion, as opposed to which restaurant to go for lunch and which restaurant to go for supper. I mean, this is serious discussions, there's serious issues. These youngsters were
there were no restaurants then.
Oh, that must be what it was.
And et cetera, et cetera. The temptations were fewer. There was no videos. There was, put yourself back in that time. We had a radio at home. That's it. We didn't have a television because there was no television. And to step out and buy a television, which was very costly, and it was also suggested then it was not exactly right. So we were, yes, at that time, that was the 1950s, 1950s, yes, it was post-war, and people were, this group of friends, I am very privileged to be part of these friends, but they were the children of the people who founded the Machzike Hadass. And they were the Auschwitzgemeinde. So if you can imagine Shimshon von Hirsch, when he was battling and he created an Auschwitzgemeinde, he really led the battle. He really led the battle. But that was in 150 years ago. But this was in Pressburg, of course, it happened Chassam Sofer, and in Germany itself, in a few places. So yes, there was a battle royal between the Orthodox and the Reform, which we were very much aware of.
Amazing. So, what is the first memory that you have of the concept of Lubavitch? The first glimmer.
Well, that's very simple. Yud Tes Kislev. In Manchester Yeshiva, there was a teacher there called Rabbi Yitzchak Dubov, and he had a shtibel downtown, and he used to make a farbrengen every Yud Tes Kislev. His balabatim were few, and they weren't so learned either. And Rabbi Dubov insisted, because he was a teacher in the Manchester Yeshiva, so we were allowed to go, and we went, and quite a number of us. And he sung Podav Shalom, and he Chazad Maimer, and he told the whole story, Yud Tes Kislev. He wasn't too articulate. It was an old shul converted from a church. There was an oven in the corner, so you had to be near the corner to be reasonably warm in the winter. But this was a very frugal lifestyle. And he was pounding away, Yud Teskis, the Yud Teskis, the Yud Teskis. You know, it just started to dawn on me that there is such a festival as Yud Teskis, so I never heard of it. So that was the experience which I had, participated in that in Manchester Yeshiva, where we had Rosh Yeshivas, teaching, Nigla, of course. And he taught a Shir in Tanya, which I didn't understand, which I referred to before. And I wrote to the Rebbe, I didn't understand, and the Rebbe said what the problem was. So these were the beginning flames which I started to query and understand. And I started to try and reason to myself how it dovetails with my membership of Agudas Yisrael, of Yiddishkeit, and so on and so forth. I went into the Machzike Hadas Beis HaMedrash on Erev Shabbos, and there was a Yid, Belzer Chossid, his name was Wolf Dresner. So I said to him, "Was is Lubavitch?" He was quiet, he was before Mincha. He says, "Lubavitch, sie haben Mühe fast zwei Sachen. They're frightened of two things, der Eibishter und Shkia." So that was the sum total of Wolf Dresner's perception of Lubavitch.
What did he mean?
He meant that they're genuine Yerushalayim. He meant that in the fight between Hasidim and Misnagdim, they are bigger Misnagdim than the Polish Hasidim. And he meant that they have this frumkeit, a Shulchan Aruch, which expects that people should daven before Shkia, and until recently, I say recently, 10 years or five years before the Stalkus of the Rebbe, Shkia was kept religiously. It's only later, personally, the Rebbe davened later and so on and so forth, but Shkia was, and also dovetailed with the literature derech, because famously the Gra paskins the same way. So I was just trying to get my feet wet and trying to understand what it is. And I was compelled through my discussions with people that the Lubavitch is something else. And I was going on to tell you that in Gateshead Yeshiva, if I may skip to Gateshead Yeshiva, and I wrote to the Rebbe that I'd like to learn Hasidus with somebody. And the Rebbe said in his letter to me, you should go to speak to Rabbi Beryl Levine. He lives in Sunderland. So I went to see him. He was a sheikhet who came in once a week to do shchita in Gateshead. Sunderland is about 15 miles from Gateshead in the northeast of England. And every Friday I went out in the summer, especially to learn Hasidus with him. I was so unsure that after about 10 shiurim, he turned to me and he says, "Can I know your name?" So I said, "It really doesn't matter. Let's just leave it."
You didn't tell him your name?
No. I didn't want to get involved. I was,
It was just the two of you?
Yes. And he taught me Lekutei Torah. He started off with Odom Ki Yakriv, and he used to teach me on a Friday afternoon for 2 hours. And then I went back to Gateshead and I started to repeat it and think about it. And then he taught me another one, Al Keni Yoma, the fundamental memory in Lekutei Torah. But I didn't tell him because I didn't want to commit myself.
It's a compliment to him that he sat with a bacher for 10 weeks without getting to know his name. Today,
Right.
they don't take you in without your social security number.
He was very, very gentle man. He had a tremendous voice. He was from 3 brothers from Paris, Geheben Yid, and he was very, very nice to me. And he didn't press anything. press it, didn't press anything, and it carried on. After about a year, I confided in him and giving him my name. Of course, it didn't mean anything to him.
He didn't say, "Oh, you're Faivish Vogel."
No name recognition at all.
So where did this guy come from? Who was it?
From Neville. Neville.
He was a Neveler? Mamish a Neveler?
Mamish a Neveler.
And you said
and his son, by the way, his son is, one son is a shliach in California somewhere. What's he called?
Palo Alto.
Palo Alto?
Rabbi Levin, yeah.
Levin, yeah. And he's got another son who is a Goy Noilam, who is a Rosh Yeshiva in Melbourne.
Oh, Faitel Levin is this man's son?
Faitel Levin.
So what can you tell us about this man, about this Rabbi Levine?
What can I tell you?
I've never heard of him before.
I was directed to him by the Rebbe, and I dutifully went over to him on the steps of the gates of Shul, and I said, "Are you Rabbi Levine?" Says yes. So I told him my request. It was a business connection, and I didn't want to go further. But he invites me once to his house. He lived there, and he was a extremely fine person. He was previously he came from Russia to Paris, and from Paris he came over to England, and he became a sheikhet chazan in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and he was makarev people there. And then he went over to Sunderland, where he was the sheikhet, chazan, melamed, and he taught many prominent today Rosh Yeshivas. In that this was in 1950s, mid 1950s. So he was a very fine man. Eventually, he came to London. I'm not sure that everyone was too pleased about that, but he came to London and he became our neighbor. And unfortunately, he passed away, not soon after that, but many years after that. And he was Megadol Torah in London. He had Talmidim who really swear by him. So he was a very exceptional man. And he did the initial pneumistic because he taught with me Hasidus. So I was getting my head around it. And as a result of that experience in Gateshead, being in the top shir in Gateshead, I was invited to give a drosha on Shavuos. All the Rosh Yeshivas gathered together, Rabbi Gurevitz, and Rabbi Lapien, and Moshe Schwab, and Rabbi Zakan. They were very important people in. Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
I hear.
So he was very important. So he asked me, the Menahel asked me to give a drosha. So I thought twice, and I thought to myself, excellent opportunity to repeat the Maimah of Hasidus, which I'd learned with Berul Levine. I was very, very anxious. So I got a friend of mine, and his name was Rabbi Meir Leib Rogoznitsky, whose father was a Rov in Cardiff, and when he was in Tells, he tells me that he greeted the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he came to, he was someplace. So we walked up and down the streets chazing this maimah, and I got up and I said, I repeated this maimah. I said, "Bibalt has heintis Shavuos," so it's appropriate to say a teaching of one of the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov. The Menahel countered with a smile. He says, "Efshe from David HaMelech," and I responded not too respectfully. Anyway, I went on to say the Maimah, and my friends in Gates at that time, I was very close to them. One of them articulated, he said, "You spoke beautifully, but I didn't exactly understand what you were talking about." So this idea of Pnimis Torah is the most radical teaching there is, because as long as a person is steeped in Nigla Torah and Halacha, he has nowhere to go, and he's missing out on the central feature of what it's all about. And thank God, by Shem, I had this chus to find my own way there. 25 Bochrim came to the station to say goodbye, and that was my end of the Gateshead experience and the good experience, and so on and so forth. And then I want to come to a person who is very dear to me, who really, I'm trying to keep to your brief, you know, to the people who brought me in. So you had this Rabbi Shem Tov, who was a wandering Shudah, and he never stayed in any town longer than a couple of days. He was, the Frierdiker Rebbe named him a sehr gut of Ackern, very good to plow. Well, you plow, you make a bit of a noise, and and you upset the status quo. And he was a very interesting person, and of course, by reputation in his survival in Russia, etc., etc. So he had an easy entry into my respect and but when I came to Gateshead, well, I came to Lubavitch 3 weeks before Purim in Tovshin Yud Ches. The first Verbrengen I had was Purim Tovshin Chai, which has gone down in the annals of history as something very special.
Yeah, what a way to get started. I'm sorry, I just muted you by accident. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, is that better?
The first Verbrengen was Purim Tavshin Chai?
Yes, but before we go to the Verbrengen, I came into 770, and the evening Seder, David Raskin over Shalom, he came over to me, says, what are you going to learn? So I said, I don't know, I'd like to have a chav or something. So he introduced me to all people, to a man called Yisrael Friedman. And we sat down at the table, the very front table where the Rebbe comes in, and with him from 8:30 till 10:30, we started to learn Sheresh Mitzvahs Tefillah. And we continued that for 1.5 years. He was the most difficult man in my eyes, but he had tremendous capacity. Yeah, he was, unfortunately, sadly, he just passed away. He was the most erudite, articulate, exacting, demanding, but he demanded from himself. He struggled with himself. And that struggle, he was open with it, and he invited, it's the wrong word, he forced me to engage with him in his struggle. So there was no peace, but it was the greatest experience I've ever had. And I maintained a friendship with him even when I came to 770, visiting, and so for many years. I saw him only a couple of years ago in Hisa Chaza Chassidus in Empire Stiebel. So clear, so articulate, so struggling for conveying, now I have the language to understand it, it's articulating the abstract. Vos meint das? Vos meint das? You talk abstract ideas, it's not repetitive. He was so thorough, and he was insulting. He never took prisoners. You know, he screamed at me, and I was very uncomfortable in many of those months. But you know, I was happy to suffer which I consider would suffer by his mouth, but he destroyed in me any sense of pride or achievement, you know. But he was a great teacher, and I loved him dearly.
He was your age.
He was my age. That's right.
So it's not like you're listening to a mashpi. You were sitting with a chaver. He was a chaver and a rav all together.
He was a chaver. He was my, what do you call it, Talmud chaver. He said, learn chavrusa. So David Raskin did the biggest favor to me. He introduced me to him, and I never let go of him for years. You know, never get go of him. And I used to chase him up the stairs to see what he's doing when he's davening. And the organs and that was a familiar statement he made. You know, he punished himself, and his davening and his verbrengens, you know, very powerful, very powerful. And I'm saying mazel, yeah, you need a bit of mazel, you know. So, so he was my hero in that era. So when you talked about who, because this particular interview is about who shaped myself. It was these three people. Shem Tov by reputation was more makif, but I also attended a clandestine shir in Gates of Yeshiva. When a bocher came over to me, he says, you know, there's a private shir being given in Tanya. Do you want to come? So I went, and he taught us Shah HaYichud Ve'emunah. I can still remember.
Who was giving it?
Rabbi Shem Tov. He used to travel to Gates, he'd travel everywhere. He traveled here, travel there. And he gave the shir, and all the boys were you know, among the boys were serious Talmid Chachamim. And he explained how the wood doesn't exist. You know, what are you talking about? You know, it was just so strange to us that you know, so now I'm leaning over again and again after 60 years, I still don't understand exactly what was going on, but at least I understand what I don't understand. But those days, there was a revolutionary language. And so he had an influence, but minor, because he was only in and out, he never. And that's why I say Rabbi Ben Levine was a very, very great influence on us. And then there was Saul Friedman. So
when you talk about a better Levine, you said that you learned with him, but did you also, pardon the expression, hang out with him? Did you watch him daven? Did you watch his hanoga, or it was just a chavrusa?
There was just a very clinical chavrusa, which I put up the limitations. I don't want to get involved, you know. Let's do this. But later on, when he came to London, he was my neighbor. I saw his activities and everything else. And he went to the Rebbe, the first time he went to the Rebbe by plane, he stood in front of the Rebbe and gave the ganze Verbrengen. It was a hergish about hergish. But this ability, if I have any ability in saying things about things which make sense and abstract matters, Yisrael was the pioneer in this. Yisrael Friedman was a pioneer in this. And then he joined up with Yoel, started to come into the base of it. Hello? So this is what shaped me in that way. And as I go on in life and I'm trying to talk in English and trying to speak, and I'm very much involved this way, I want to make a plug for a book that I'm trying to back and push, Social Vision. I don't know whether you've seen it. Have you?
Yes, I've seen it, but I've not read it.
Oh.
You were involved with it?
Well, not involved. Only just a year ago, in August the 1st, it was published. August the 1st, 2019, which was 9 months ago, it was published. And my Adim, Dov Drizin, came to London and gave me one of these books. And I fell in love with it because of all the books that have been written about the Rebbe, the problem is that all these books are about the Rebbe. It's not Rebbe. What this man has done, with partnering by Eli Rubin, initiated, by the way, by Nehemiah Vogel when he was a professor of sociology in Rochester, upstate New York. He developed a chavrusa with him, and as a sociologist, he embraced the socio-mystical dimension of Torah into the mainstream of sociology. And he wrote a long book about it, and he articulates it very well. And I'm just desperate to get this pushed. As recently as this morning, I spoke to Josh Metzger, trying to get his father involved, and this one and that one. And I had a review printed in the Allgemeine Journal, and another review is coming up. I'd love to see it sold widely, because it's the first book that is, if I may say, Rebbe. It's not about the Rebbe. It's the intellectual comprehension of the Rebbe. Sorry for narrowing it down. It's the mystical comprehension of the Rebbe in all miktsaya of Torah, which facilitates this ability of the Rebbe to write letters, to support programs on a wide range of subjects, which these are becoming into the mainstream of American society. And this is big stuff. This is real big stuff, because the potential is enormous. And it's a way how people will be able to understand the Rebbe. And he's not hiding behind esoteric language, but it's articulated in everyday realities. And the author of this integration is the Rebbe himself. And this professor, what his name is, Dr. Wexler, has written about it. Of course, he was helped by Eli Rubin and also Nehemiah Vogel. So that's a very important book. And I just believe that everybody, I tried to make book launches, but then I was overtaken by coronavirus. And then you got the riots in America. You know, it's good heavens, you know, what's happening. The Meneers and Ikuvim are unbelievable, but I think the Rebbe would want this very much.
Interesting. It's interesting that you're not jealous of the Rebbe's, of a man who is not a chassid writing a book about the Rebbe. It's interesting that you are not jealous about that, that you are not defensive about that you wouldn't insist that only a chassid could present the Rebbe and the Rebbe's thoughts in the proper way.
Not only what you said do I agree, but adrabah. Mineu be'aba lishte be'narka. It's the secularists, in Yoel's interpretation of Hasidus, which is, especially just now, I saw this 9th volume of the encyclopedia. His articulation of this in everyday allows everyday questions and everyday answers. And of course, there's a whole genre of younger people now who have taken up his teachings and adopted his style. Every stone must be uncovered, and this matches the nevuah of the Zohar in the second half of the 6th millennium. the secrets of matter of the world will be revealed and coincide with the revealing of Hasidus. So the evolutionary process which the Rebbe initiated and followed through at every moment while he was still Bialmudain, hopefully I'd like to believe that he's carrying on at this moment, not just in the being a Magin and a defender of the Jewish people, Rabbi and so on, but he is helping the ordinary person to become more abstract and harness that abstraction in all mixtures of life. And that's what the Rebbe did with all his activities. So just as he did it he did it with Brandenburg. Power, solar power. He did it with Lipska, with the prisons. Recently embraced into a government law which goes 1 inch closer to what the Rebbe wants, which is really that there should be no prisons.
Right.
Not as the mayor of Minneapolis, your town, says there should be no police, there should be no prisons.
He's close, he's getting closer. Palgina di Buddha. So I want to drag you back to England, even though you already went across the ocean to New York. But
Okay.
I want to drag you back to Rabbi Shem Tov. You distinguish between a book about the Rebbe and a book that is Rebbe. You distinguish between a book about the Rebbe and a book that is Rebbe, right?
Yes.
Rabbi Shem Tov, if he gave you a class in Shara Yichud Ve'emunah, if he was giving a clandestine class in Shara Yichud Ve'emunah, I have no doubt, 1 second, let me mute everybody. I have no doubt that he must have pushed the Rebbe a lot, because that's the kind of person that he was, if I understand correctly. That he wasn't just pushing Chassidus, he was pushing the Rebbe as a person and as a Rebbe. And I'm curious, first of all, I want to ask you, what year were you born in?
I was born in 1936.
So do you have any memories of the Lubavitcher Rebbe being the Frierdiker Rebbe?
I've had that question a number of times. The Frierdiker Rebbe passed away in 1950. I was 14 years old. I'm very sorry, I have to confess, I was more interested in playing cricket.
That's very, very hard to understand.
Very hard to
understand. It's a boring game.
Well, there'll come a day. Okay. So about the Frierdiker Rebbe, but my first introduction in the Frierdiker Rebbe was much later. I mean, the fact that he was in Soviet prison, of course, that was the big thing, and there was respect for him, but it never filtered down to me. It just never filtered down to me.
So your first connection to the Frierdiker Rebbe was when he was already the Frierdiker Rebbe.
Yes, more yes.
Okay, so when Rabbi Shem Tov was teaching you Shara Yichud Ve'emunah, he spoke to you about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, about the Rebbe in New York?
Well, he did very, very little, because he was in Gateshead and he was a politician and he didn't want to step on people's toes. And yes, he was very, very clandestine. You know, he kept those things to himself. But in all his activities, yes, of course, he breathed Rebbe. He breathed Rebbe. And that came out in certain instances later. That came out in 1960s when I was already in London. Very, very devoted and that, but it never reached the peak that it is today. There was no talk about Mashiach. He never talked about Mashiach.
Mashiach is but just the Rebbe. I mean, Ben Shem Tov was a pioneer
Okay.
in this field, right?
It what? I'm sorry?
Rabbi Shem Tov was a pioneer in this field of making the Rebbe the subject as opposed to the Chassidus, etc.
Yes, and he did something exceptional, and that was he founded the Likutei Sichos. His Sichos, he paid for it. He had a printing press in Israel when he was there, when to visit. And also, I recall that in on Shavuos, Tovshin Yudches, when we were marching to Borough Park, into our hands was given the green Sichos. You know what the green Sichos is?
No.
It was the first.
Printed on recycled paper.
It was the first Sicha that came out, and that was Shavuos. And this is what we were supposed to chazer in Borough Park. I didn't get a chance to speak there, but later on I was hoisted on the backs of a few bochrim and gave a shtickle drosha on that Sicha. So he was a pioneer of that, Sicha, which was mimeographed. It was, and it was given out, and that was the Sicha, that marked the very first Sicha that was given out. So he was very, very strong on the Rebbe, and it's not the platform to talk about some of the Verbrengens that took place in London, which it would be, quote, inappropriate to tell you what he said in moments of
sobriety. I understand. So, but Rabbi Shem Tov, Ben Shem Tov teaching you that there's no world, it sounds very appropriate. It sounds very, it sounds like it fits. And yet I never imagined him as a Maggid Shir. It's an interesting vision.
No, he explained this Shari Yichud very, very, very well. And I still recall the impression after so many years it made on me, because, Yoel used to speak in similar language. He used to talk, he came into the base of medicine once, he says, in the Sofatish, you're looking at a table, what is the tish? What's the tish? It's van Choyma and Surah. It's all in your mind, because it's all in your mind, because this Choyma, take away the Surah, there's no Choyma. Take away the Choyma, there's no Surah. The Etzem, so he was talking about Etzem. He was giving a share on Atzmus, Etzem, the bone behind the skin, But Yoel dissected it in an incredible way, so it became very real. It became very real. So Ben Shem Tov also was very real in that, with Verbrengens when he spoke, and he was a brave man. He used to go into the Satmar Shtibel, with the richest people there, the burghers, and he used to talk about Len Chassidus and all the rest of it, and they respected him because of his history of being. But there was also those were difficulties. I remember when I came back on the ship with Queen Mary to London, because the Rebbe had said to me, I asked the Rebbe to be Masadi Kedushin. So the Rebbe didn't answer. So I went to Rabbi Chodakov, and I said to him, what's Pshat? He said, I'll find out. So then he told me he asked the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said to me, Ven forte, when is he traveling?
If you go on shlichus.
And he wanted to be assured that the shlichus that he'd given me, I would fulfill. So I said after Shabbos Bereshis, he said, okay. And that was, he was masking to give the Masadi Kedushin. So the well, the point I'm trying to make here is that the Rebbe was very exacting in his relationship. When it was very, the very first Yechidus, I went to the Rebbe and I asked him that I should achieve some skashus with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe bluntly said, "It's learning my Chassidus, Zana Mokusha." You know, it was a very real, demanding relationship. And other times with Rabbi Shem Tov, he was the symbol of Lubavitch in the United Kingdom for many, many years. And he was Mecca people from Sunderland, the Refsons, and the Jaffes in Manchester.
Rosen.
And with Rabbi Rosen, Oliver Sholem, Koppel Rosen, Oliver Sholem, that saga in 1963. So
I know Koppel Rosen because of your book. Challenge is your book, yeah?
Yeah.
Right? These are very striking photos of him in this book.
That's right. He's got a son who I'm trying to make out of. He lives in the Upper West Side.
Manhattan.
And Jeremy Rosen.
In New York.
In New York.
So Rabbi Dubov, you mentioned him before, but did you have any shaykhis with him as influenced by him at all? I mean, this man was, from what I read in Der Herr, he was an extraordinary man.
Is it? Yeah, well, I'll tell you something. When I was in Gateshead, I used to come home for Yom Tov and so on. And I used to spend quite a bit of time with him. And I used to go into his house, very modest house. And he had a light, 100-watt light lamp burning over narrow part of the table. And we learned Chassidus. And whenever he taught me a sikha from the Rebbe, it was accompanied with a sense of joy, a sense of great joy and happiness. He corresponded with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe gave him a lot of tshuvas, but he was a pure man. When I say he was a great lamdan, by the way, and a poisek. In fact, he was a rov in some Russian town, but he had the simplicity and the purity of a Poshet Yid. Not like, my mentor, Rabbi Yisrael Friedman, said to me once, "The chesroinus from Poshet Yidin hast du, aber the miles hast du nicht."
I was going to get into what exactly you meant when you said that he gave you a hard time, but this is a good glimpse.
Oh, that was
very good.
That was the more respectable type of remark.
Oh, that's very good. So you were nurtured by some very serious chassidim. This very serious chassidim, Ben Shem Tov and Dubov, and this Ber Levinu I never heard of to my shame. But these are very serious people.
And Yisrael Friedman, these were giants. These were giants.
One second, let me just unmute some people over here. Sorry, I muted you again by accident. Yeah. So I have to be a little bit impudent and say that in my imagination, a young man coming from England into the cauldron of 770 would probably find the emotionality of it very new. Especially you got hitched up with Yisrael Friedman right away. And here you have a man struggling with himself the way you described and the way I would like you if you could expound on that. But this must have been very new, unless you had some introduction to that before. But in the Litvish yeshivas and the Welsh yeshivas, things are very straightforward. Learn Rashi and learn Tosfos. There's no major struggles with self or a lot of emotion like the Fabrengens of Ben Shem Tov. So how did you adjust to this, or did you
Well,
adjust?
it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And one of the great Verbrengens, which there was on Shvi Shel Pesach, which was just a few weeks after I came, the traditional Verbrenger was Rab David Raskin. But he was a down-to-earth man. By the way, there was once an incident in 770 that one of the Junge Light called over to David Raskin and said to him, David, du verstellst. The Rebbe picked it up and he said, David verstellt nicht. That's a type of person he was. He was such a Kabbalah Silnik. He was in charge of Sirius Chabad, pushing everybody to go and Chazar Hasidus on Shabbos and everything else. He was very, very direct. And I believe that Rabbi Chadakov used to come into the Verbrengens of Rab David Raskin, and he would chuckle with delight at some of his more prosaic utterances. He was very, very down to earth. But there was another, that was the first Verbrengen I had there with him. And he used to take a look at Mashka, and he used to, you know, what he told me about, he says, you talk, people talk and talk and talk. Why do the people talk and talk and talk about this Zung hat nicht Beine? But the next big Verbrengen I experienced was on Lag Boimer with a teacher called Rab Sholem Morozov.
Uh-huh.
Rab Sholem Morozov, he sat down at 9:30 on Lag Boimer and Verbreng till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And he always used to start off, es ist nicht so was zu reden, which he repeated countless times during the Verbrengen, and countless times after he'd taken a lot of mashka. But his talks were flavored with Gemaras and Poskim and Chassidus. You know, it was just an eye-opener. So when I saw that, this is something different. So I was attracted very much to that, and then I started to drink, which was not in on my schedule. I started to drink, and I started to feel the after effects of the drink, and then I started to be open with people, more open with people. And I remember labeled Raskin. I remember, yes, it was labeled Raskin, Oliver Shaw. You're familiar with these people?
Yes.
Labeled Raskin, after the Verbrengen with Sholem Morozov, when I was staggering around a kidda, he put his hand on my shoulder and he says, Ich verstehe, as du is a bisschen anders. I see that this is a bit different. And basically he said to me, stick around.
And you appreciated that.
Oh yeah, it was insightful.
But it's amazing to me that I pardon the expression, this Wildkeit in a positive way, the Verbrengen, earthy, prosaic, as you say. And then from the Chassidische Verbrengen to the Rebbe's Verbrengen, and the first Verbrengen that you add is Purim Tavshin Chai, and you're expecting a sheer klali, like what you experience in a yeshiva, and you have a Purim Tavshin Chai Verbrengen. I don't understand where you got Kalim for this.
I want to say the thing. I came to that Verbrengen at 5:30 with a Chavr of mine, Aaron Cousin. We were both learning in 770, and we decided it was in Albany, a hotel, hall in Albany. I don't know whether you recall these. There was, in Albany, and we came there, and I got number 1 ticket. He got number 2 ticket in the cloakroom, where we put our coats. And the room was empty. And we were looking where to stand. So we thought we saw the top table. And so we decided we're going to stand at the front of the long table that goes away from the top table. And I was there for about a couple of hours until suddenly I got a shock. I found myself, first of all, that was Label Grono's place. So I didn't know who Label Grono was. And so I was sitting there and I was just totally absorbed in everything. He said, the Rebbe said of Maimah, yeah, the Sikhs, he said later on about Hayesel Milchemes Beis David Sarach Lichris get the Ishtoi. So that was a more simpler ideas. But he started off with a Verbrengen, Chai Vodel Besume Bepuria Adeloyada. And it lasted for 65 minutes. I followed the first 5 minutes. And I was just looking at him. It was just a spectacle. It just go on and on. It was enthralling. No, I didn't have a clue what I was talking about.
You understood Yiddish.
Yeah, but I don't understand Aramaic, and Kabbalah I don't understand, and the translations of half the Hasidus in Hebrew anyway. I was more happy when I joined in the yeshiva. I used to, on Shabbos Mincha, the Rebbe used to have Mincha upstairs, okay? You know what I'm talking about, upstairs?
Yeah.
And he came in through the back and he sat down at the table facing, no, he wasn't facing Mizrach, he was facing, wasn't facing Mizrach, he was facing, and I sat down at the table, mat next to it, and all I saw was the Rebbe davening. He never moved. There was no gesture. I think I once saw a stifled yawn, which I understood later on because he didn't sleep on Thursday night. He didn't sleep. I didn't find that. So, and I saw the whole image I had was black and white. He had black took white shirt to the right table, and there was no movement. And I just enjoyed just being there. I don't know what it was, but it was just being there. And as I started to hear about the gadlus of the Torah of the Rebbe, and I read in Shmotkin's book. Is it Shmotkin's book?
Which book?
That first book, the big book. Oh, it was Shmotkin's Help. Early years.
Yeah.
Early years.
Yeah. O'Connor's.
And I was watching, reading I went to the book and I opened the page where the Rebbe's Bar Mitzvah took place. And I heard a lot of stories about the Rebbe's Bar Mitzvah. And he didn't say the whole story. I don't think it was said, but that's a Zeitige Gesach. But the certainty of the Rebbe being such Boki in every single corner of Torah, and also in science and this and all the rest of it. I was brought a playwright who was writing a play on Samson and Delilah. Stellt sich vor what he was writing. And he wrote I got him into Chidus. He was there for an hour and a half. This was in the early 60s. And he came out and he wrote the play, and he wrote an introduction of his meeting. And he sent it to the Rebbe. I told him I must send it to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe nonchalantly read through this play. I don't know, I couldn't read it. Read the play. And then the Rebbe said, yes, I did say this, I did say that, but you've omitted something. So I was thinking to myself, how the Rebbe vernemtzach, this was in the 60s, with people who were just off the wall. And mit apnemius, devoted, did this. So, the image of the Rebbe in my mind has grown a million times than the first impression, just impression was Rebbe. It grows, it does grow on you. And you've got a lot to look forward to, I believe. Because if you will earnestly devote yourself to doing what the Rebbe says you should do, and now we know more what the Rebbe said we should do than ever it's been. I mean, the publications, the programs, the unbelievable. So we've got a richness. We're blessed, and we haven't got the time. The Rebbe gives a bit of energy and gesund, It's a blessing every minute of our lives.
What were you going to say about the Rebbe's bar mitzvah? You started and then you stopped. Where were you going with
I
that?
stopped because it's an embarrassing omission, I think. There's a part about the Rebbe's bar mitzvah. It was all day. People came from Yekaterinslav, who was the Rav, so a lot of people came from people, not from people. They came to pay respects to the Rebbe, to Rabbi, who was the Rav. And there was a moment when the Rebbe was together with his father. And different versions, but there seems to have been the Rebbe Leivik was asking the Rebbe to do something. And he was refusing. And it took an hour or two till this question was resolved. And the evidence of Rebbe Tzimchana, who was looking in from the Faivish shul, saw this, and nobody knows what happened. Have you heard this story?
Yeah. So your point was the Rebbe's strength of personality.
Strength of personality.
I don't know.
This is a 13-year-old bar mitzvah arguing with his father, who was a giant and who he deeply respected.
Right.
And he said no to something. And nobody wants to say what that no was.
But that's besides the point.
It's not beside the point. It's besides the point. That's more peaceful.
I mean, the fact that he could say no to his father means that he was a bar das at the age when boys are supposed to become a bar das, which nobody does.
Well, I'll tell you something, and he did what he had to. The Rebbe was, once there was a confrontation between the Rebbe and the Friedrich Rebbe in the Mems. And the Friedrich Rebbe said something, and the person came down to the Rebbe, and he asked the Rebbe's opinion, and the Rebbe said the opposite. And he went back and told the Friedrich Rebbe. And I heard the version, I hope it's right. The Friedrich Rebbe said, Datoi das Yosha. Ich schäme for him. Did you hear that?
No. You said the Mems. I assume you meant the 40s.
No, I meant the 40s, yes.
The 40s, yeah. No, I never heard this. I never heard that. What was the issue?
I don't know what the issue was. I think the issue was a painting in the room on the way to the Friedrich Rebbe's room. There was a forest, whatever it was. One of these types of simple paintings. And the Rebbe said it should be with water.
What does that mean? It should be with water.
There should be a river flowing, water flowing.
You mean they were making a painting?
They should change the painting.
What? This I never heard. What is that?
What is that? These are the. First of all, you have to suspect that the story is not true, and even if it's true, gewachsener Bord, verstehst du? So all these things are, but the certainty of the Rebbe, never hesitated, and with with unbelievable. There's so many stories. Every person needs a story which he can personally relate to, but if a person can, and this is what I'm trying to do, to take the Rebbe extremely seriously. And because of this book, which I'm just latched on to just now, I just believe he's very serious. And you have some very good people working there. You've got Menachem Schmidt, you've got Eli Rubin, you've got Motti Zelligson, and then Zama Schmotkin. They invested a lot of money and time and energy in the Chabad.org, and they've done tremendous things, but this book, which they sponsored virtually, it's not just a financial question. Please God will get out of that, but it's got to go, because the Rebbe never gave up on anything. His Devoroi is Kayim Lo'ad. And the permanence of this vision, which we today have tremendously with all the, I'm tempted to tell you a little story from yesterday, but also tremendous things, how the Rebbe wrote a zettel about a sikha in Shlach, printed in the Kute Sichas Yud Gimel. And there's a zettel associated with that, where the Rebbe said, if that's what I said, burn the zettel. Did you see it?
No.
I can send it to you. But
Oh, I did hear this. Yes, I did hear this from Rabbi Shapiro about the Meraglim.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Are you keeping up? Are you keeping up with this new project of Likutei Sichos?
I'm telling you something. I've got so many things to do. I've got to learn the Rambam. I've got to say Tehillim, and I've got to say Kuf Yud Tes, and I've got to daven. I've got to say the word. It takes me hours.
But you mentioned Chelik Yud Gimel. I thought maybe it's because you're holding with, because that's where they're up.
No, I made you good because that was the Maramok which I got. Of course, I learned here and there. Try to follow this and follow that. But
can I tell you a story and get your commentary on it? I heard the story from the son-in-law of the Bala Maisa. The Bala Maisa was a Jew in Tel Aviv in Tafshin Yud. He was a young guy, maybe he was a bacher, and he went into shul, the Chabad shul in Tel Aviv, either the Shabbos after Yud Shvat or the Shabbos after that, somewhere in the middle of recently after Yud Shvat, after the Histalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And he comes into the shul. He used to go there after davening because the Chassidim of Tel Aviv used to farbring after the davening. There was a chassid there, Moshe Gurari, and there were other great chassidim, maskilim, and they used to farbring very geschmack after davening every Shabbos about chassidus, in Yonim and chassidus. And one of the participants in the farbringen was often the Rebbe's brother. So in this Shabbos was no farbringen about chassidus. It was right after the Histalkus, and there was a discussion about the Memala Mokim. And as they were talking about who's going to be the Memala Mokim, the Rebbe's brother, Label, came in, and sat down at this Farbrengen. So one of the Chassidim, perhaps Moshe Garari, said to the Rebbe's brother, label, Efshevet Ir Zain, the Naya Rebbe, or something like that. So the Balamaisa says, yeah. So the Balamaisa says that label got very upset, turned like pale, got very quiet, and then he looked at them and he says, "Mein Bruder wird sein Ei Rebbe, und wird euch lernen Avdus."
Wow.
And then he got quiet again, he thought about what he said, and then he left the Farbrengen. Wird euch lernen Avdus.
Yeah.
You know, there are some stories that you hear from somebody and it just goes into your neshama and stays there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to know what you think about that line from the Rebbe's brother. Because you're talking about the Rebbe, about this kind of a stolz, about this certainty. What do you say about that?
Let me give you a little story which is probably meaningless to you. You were talking before about Challenge, this book with Rosen, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. So the people who were doing that job were Kurovim of mine, and the name was Rader, Ben-Sion Rader, who his daughter has 15 children, Kanai Nahora, and each and every one of them are shluchim all over the world.
It's Weinbaum.
Yes. Yeah. So his wife, she was a very elegant and intelligent lady, and she was my secretary for a number of years. So she did this. She was looking after the Challenge together with her husband. Great things. She eventually came to see the Rebbe in Yechidus, because I brought Ben-Sion Reda, Oliver Sholem, to Yechidus, and he came once, and a week later he came again, and a week later he came again. And when I went into Yechidus after the first time, the Rebbe said to me, "Bestome wird man sich sehen noch einmal in Gichen." And I didn't story, I have no intention. So Mrs. Rader was a real personality, and she came in to see the Rebbe with her husband, and other people were saying, but the Rebbe is a kind man, a soft man. And she came out and blurted out to me. She said, "He's a very hard man."
Yeah.
It's just meaning to say that while she was wriggling in the argument and discussion was happening, and this, and where the son should go to school, not Rabbi school, they had to go to City of London School, which is a very, very great state school. And the Rebbe was adamant. And that came across to her very strongly. So when you talk about Avdos, it resonates. Well, the conversation, what do I think about that? I'm delighted because I remember, I don't remember the Petira of the Rebbe's brother, because that was in Liverpool in 1953. What I do remember about that, a little, a Yechidus that took place many, many years later. Liverpool had a Rav, and this Rav, he was, by the way, a Mizrahi Rav, by the way, a Litvish Rav, and his name was Plitnik. He had a son, And his name was Yankel Plitnik. He's a very old man today, but 30 years ago, 40 years ago, he took a friend of his, or a friend of his took him in to see the Rebbe. Okay. And this other man, who his father had a relationship with the Rebbe, was talking to him, and then he introduced him. He says, "This is Yankel Plitnik." So the Rebbe raised his eyebrow. He said, "Plitnik? The son von Harav Plitnik?" So he says, "Yeah." I was looking, the Rebbe said, to express my gratitude. Again, I never had an opportunity to speak to a family member of the Plitniks, who, as the Rav of the Shul, looked after the Kavura, the Kavura, wherever it was. And I never had an opportunity to give my thanks. So I want to use wrong word. I want to give you this gratitude, and you should remember that I am deeply appreciative of the way your father handled this Levi.
It's the Rebbe's brother, the Levi of the Rebbe's brother.
Yeah.
Do you remember right after Gimel Tammuz, an article came out in the New York Times from Harvey Swados?
That was an unbelievable article. I spread that article around everywhere.
But the Rebbe gave him a hard time. The Rebbe made him sweat. That's what he says. He made me sweat. And then when they asked him to sum up the Rebbe in one word, he said kindly. It's after the Rebbe challenged him and pushed him and made him sweat.
No, that was a very insightful article, and very well. He had died at that time, Swados.
Yeah.
And it was printed in the Rabbi Krinsky published a big thick book of the press, and that was the front page, and I use that very, very often. But I'll tell you something. It's it's mavriach min hakotza lakotza. Every single engagement that you will hear from anybody around the world about the Rebbe is consistent scope and the certainty and the emes of the Rebbe. And the Man Hashem is talking to people and trying to get them to think straight and all the rest of it. There was another little incident which took place here in London. I have an Adim called Alti Bukit.
My uncle.
Is your uncle? How's your uncle?
Because I married Stillman, which is Bukit.
Oh, okay. Sorry for that. So Alti came to see me in London. He came to see me in London. Visit, very nice, a couple of years ago. Recently, a year ago or something, whatever it was. So I introduced him because I was davening because I couldn't walk a long way so I was davening in the Shtibel, which was run by a man called Reb Chaim Halpern, who was the son of Reb Elchanan Halpern. Elchanan Halpern was the senior one of the senior dayanim in the United Orthodox Hebrew congregations, from the seriously right wing. And when Alti came to America, when Alti came to London, he was one of the first shluchim in the Faivish Yeshiva here in London. Okay? So he came, so Rabbi Hertz organized that the Bochrim should go out to Chazar Chassidus, and he was allocated to Rabbi Chonon Halpern's Shtibel. And very kindly, Rabbi Chonon sat and listened to a sicha which Alti repeated. I'll get you chapter and verse on this because I think I've got a copy and Alti's certainly got a copy. So he came over to Chaim Halpin, and he says, I have a choiv to you, to your father, 33 years ago.
Who said this to who?
Alti said this to the Rav,
Okay.
To the son.
the son, Chaim Halpin, who was a Fitzach Rabbi, you know. So he came over to him, he's on Shabbos, and he says, I've got a choiv which I owe 33 years. Was it? He said, because he repeated the story that he went to Chazar Chassidus in the Mechona Halpin Shtibel, and he was mechabed him to speak, and he said a sicha. The sicha, the current sicha, which the Rebbe said wherever recently. Okay. And then Reb Chona Halpin turns around to Alti, and he says, oh, jetzt verstehe ich a piskam in a sefer which is just escaping me this moment, Radomska. The Radomska wrote a sefer. What was it called? Okay, Radomska.
I have no idea.
Okay, Radomska. Alti's father was a Radomska Chosid, by the way. Tfer Shloima, yeah, Tfer Shloima. Thank you for that. You've got your men around here who's helping you. So he said this to her. He says, yes, verstehe ich, because the Radomska referred to something that I forgot the Nakuda, so I'm not a good chayzer, but I'll send it to you, you'll feel this. And he said that now, jetzt verstehe ich, was der Radomska sagt. So Alti reported this to the Rebbe. He reported it to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe made a big circle. It was Taka the moment he had to report that he was going in Shidduchim with my daughter or something, you know, this years and years ago. So the Rebbe made a big circle, including the whole piece about the conversation with Rebbe Chonan Halpin. And his Askelatzian.
Can I just interrupt? It was about the Mesiras Nefesh that Moshe Rabbeinu had for the Guf of Yidden.
Right, correct. Who's this gentleman? Who's
Schneer.
who?
Schneer. Schneer Prus.
Oh, Schneer Prus, that's right. He's listening, yeah, up to that. So he said to the Rebbe, and this Alti was holding this answer for 33 years. So he came to Chaim Halpin and he says, and he delivered the payment in the form of the response of the Rebbe. And we printed it out, we printed the Faivish, he made a ganze Suda, and he said we sent it to him. So this is around. But you know, it's every step, every word. What Halberstam did with this recording is tremendous. But there's more and more, and you'll find that every single gesture is.
Are you sure to use it?
Huh? Sorry?
Carry on. Every
gesture, every word and every half word we should pick up. Just like you told me stories just now about his brother, etc.
But I want to go back, Rabbi Vogel, for first of all, your koyach is unbelievable. It's almost been 2 hours, and I'm not going anywhere. So until you hang up, I'm not going to hang up.
I want to say the only notice I can give you is what I told you the story about Wolf Dresner. It says that Chabad haben moire fast zwei Sachen. For the Meibishten and for Shkier.
Yeah.
Here is 9:15.
Oh no.
So we've got another 10 minutes.
My father told me that when he was a Talmud by Rabbi Yoel, they so enjoyed his shiurim. He was a Talmud by him in Bedford and Dean.
Okay.
They so enjoyed his shiurim that they pulled the plug on the clock, so that the clock should stop it. Rabbi Yoel should never realize that the time for class is over. So I'm appealing to anybody who's in the room with you to do what they can to pull the plug on the clock.
Well,
but,
no.
It's not going to work. You might have okay.
Well, maybe.
We can do it. We can have a part 2.
We're not going to part 2. Look, anybody who wants to speak to me, I want to speak to them. I want to speak to even the people who don't want to speak to me. Maybe probably more than that.
Anyway, I want to go back to the Farbrengen of Purim Tavshin Chai, because Purim Tavshin Chai, by guys like me, is such a legend. I mean, we all heard the tapes. We all listened to the tapes. Did the Rebbe give you any attention at the Farbrengen?
Nothing. Which he never gave me.
Seats.
He never gave me any attention when I walked into I arrived in New York on a Tuesday morning, and I was in the ship that took me there. It was absolutely freezing. 2 Bochrim, my friends from Manchester, came to pick me up. Avremel Shem Tov and Beryl Futterfass. And we had to take, I said, let's get a taxi. He says, we can't get a taxi because there's been a snowstorm. And it says, als verfroren, and we had to go by underground. And later on, we got out into a taxi in Brooklyn. And when I walked in, I came at 11 o'clock in the morning, and 1 o'clock. So Rabbi Mentlik advised me to go to 676. That was our dormitory. And to lay down a bit, and I asked what time is Mincha, and the Rebbe that was 3:15. Okay, 3:15. So I lay down and had a bit to eat. I was freezing. I was hungry. I was tired. It felt terrible. Anyway, I walked from 676 to 770, and I came to 770 about 3 o'clock, and I took a position really in the middle, so to speak. Not too near, not too far. And I stood there. The Rebbe came in as usual. You know how the Rebbe came in, put his gattel on, and looked at the clock, and then he gave maybe a half a glance at me. Well, I said half a glance. He did not look at me, but it was just like a second, and nothing. Gave me no recognition.
And
which was.
But that didn't last. That didn't last.
They were later on because there were other things I was doing. It was me. I'll tell you something, and that was beautiful. That was beautiful. I saw the Rebbe daven for the first time. No shockling, nothing. And etzem loy mishtana. By the way, I was under the influence of the Baal Shem Tov. The 200th year of the Baal Shem Tov, when I came to London, it was 200 years from the Baal Shem Tov, yeah? In Tafshin Chof, yeah. And the Rebbe spoke 6 sichas on the Baal Shem Tov, called Etzem Bilti Mishtana, this. But Haskalah, it's not the Baal, he's not telling stories about Baal Shem Tov, he's saying the Tifta Haskalah, in philosophy, and he left us the impression on that. When I came back to England after that, and I was in the ship, the Queen Mary, I was sitting at the same table with Satmar Hasidim, and I was so excited about Hasidus and Baal Shem Tov, so I started to talk to these Satmar Hasidim. So one of the Satmar Hasidim, by the way, who was a brother-in-law of Getzel Berger, you don't know who Getzel Berger is, he owned virtually half London, you know what I mean? A big Gevir. And he said, I started to enthusiastically talk about the Baal Shem Tov. He says, "Ni, es ist doch nicht derech Baal Shem Tov."
Yeah.
Sat mir Rebbe gesagt, es ist nicht derech Baal Shem Tov. So, without a bat of an eyelid, spontaneously, with a bit of a chutzpah, with all the Eid, I said, "Oibazoi, daft ein Rebbe gehen zu der, was gedenkt."
Yeah,
He didn't speak to me for the whole 4 days.
you're kidding.
Well, I cut my bridges, I burned my bridges. It's all right being spontaneous when you get it right. And the Rebbe, this is another dimension of the Rebbe. The Rebbe spontaneously, every case is meyused 100%. That has to do with the Friedrich Rebbe, the Meister with the Friedrich Rebbe. The Friedrich Rebbe once said that, I think you will recall the story, he says, by the time I was 6 years old, is it 6 years old, 9 years old, I trained myself to conform with the Shulchan Aruch. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Shabbat, train yourself. It means to say, we're spontaneous, and half time we get it wrong. Half times we get it right. Half times we get it wrong. And so therefore, we can't be trusted on our spontaneity because be'etzem, we're corrupted individuals. That is bodicum nusa. There's no question about that. So if we are, we have a system. But this comes to another question. And this is one of the fundamental questions, which I want to leave you with. The Rebbe said, "Ich habe getan alles, was ich kann. Ich habe getan alles, was ich kann. Jetzt ist los ich das euch immer." Okay? What does that mean? I did all I did to bring Mashiach, Kodak, and now I leave it to you. Leave it to you.
I leave it over to you.
And what does that mean? Leave it over to you. You means everybody. Like there's a clip, a Murderdicke clip, when a woman, I think she was a bit upset. She came in with 6 other women, and she started to say to the Rebbe, "It's your fault, you can bring Mashiach." Did you see that clip? No?
Yeah, yes, I saw the clip. Yeah.
And he then took the finger, he pointed at her, and her, and her, and her, and her. So put yourself in that group. He's leaving this over to you. And call Iddish Yoda Benafshe. So you can't, you have to speak to people, so you have to give spontaneous responses. But Man Hashem, this is probably wrong. And this is whom he has given the shlichus over to. You, and you, and you.
Are you still agonizing over something you said on a ship 60 years ago to a Satmar Chassid?
I want to tell you, I've got a list of 12 items which I've got Chrote Gemura.
12, that's it?
Well, those are the prominent ones. Every day I discover something fresh. No, I mean what the Rebbe told me to do.
Yeah, well, we can get into the list of 12 next time we talk. But right now, that response to the Satmar Chassid, you said you're wrong 50% of the time. That was probably the other 50%.
Well, who knows? Who knows? Der Faivish soll helfen, L'chaim, soll sein a guter Chodesh, a friedlicher Chodesh, a ulediker Chodesh, soll sein Gimel Tammuz, soll sein an Aliyah, the Rebbe should ausschleppen from the blotter, and we should get it all right. I'm just wondering whether the Rebbe takes responsibility for my getting it wrong. Don't know how he can.
Wasn't there a line from the don't remember who. Some Sefer maybe. I have no problem with you saying my Titus in your name, but I have a problem with you saying your Titus in my name. Right? Something like this.
Okay.
But Rabbi, it's okay if I'm going to email you and hopefully we can schedule another talk because we only got up to
Well, you know, I think this,
1959. We didn't get very far.
oh, we didn't get very far.
There's so much more to talk about and you're a delight to talk to. So if you're open to it, I'm going to email you and when you have time, we'll do
Hey,
it.
look,
It's okay?
don't forget what David Raskin said. The Zung wird nicht mied, es hat nicht kein Beine.
Well, good. Well, for the listeners to this interview, that's unser Mazel. So thank you very much for that.
Okay.
And
Sei
I wanna
gesund.
return the blessings. Sei gesund und stark and continue. You're one of the
I
original
give
shluchim.
my best wishes to Manis, who was always in my mind.
You have shown the way for many shluchim from the original shluchim. You continue to lead us until Ad Bias Goyal Tzedek. Sei gesund, Rabbi Vogel. Thank you.
Sei gesund, Koltov.
Sei gesund.